Hello, everybody. We're going to start in just a few minutes, so have a seat, grab a drink, turn up the volume. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just waiting for our guest, so just a couple more minutes. Hold tight. Oh, I appreciate all the waves. Hi. All right, if you're just joining, we're waiting just another minute or so for our featured guest, Chris Viner, to join us. But thank you for tuning in to Book Club's Author Chats. I'll take this moment to mention if while you're watching the interview, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And hopefully there's time we can tee up the question to Chris. All right, I think just another minute. We're getting him logged into the room here. Okay, away we go.
Okay.
All right. Can you hear me? We are live.
I can't hear you.
Well, turn up.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
There might be a slight delay.
Okay.
All right, you're good to go.
Good to go.
All right. So before we get started, I'm just going to do a brief introduction. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today's Book Club's Author Chat. My name is Carrie Thornbrew. I'm the Director of Marketing and Growth for Book Clubs, a free web and mobile app that makes starting and organizing your book club simple. Our mission is to inspire meaningful connections through reading and discussion, and which is why we host this monthly book club author chat series for a chance to the writers themselves. So with that being said, I'm going to briefly introduce our guest, Chris Viner. He is based in New York City. He's the author of Brief Tenancies, published by J New Books. His work appears in Colorado Review, Critical Read, Culture Trip, the Festival Review, the London Magazine, and Woven Tailed Press, among others. He holds degrees from Goldsmiths University. Whoop, whoop.
Whoop.
That's how I know Chris. St. Anne's College, University of Oxford, where he was a recipient of the F.H. Pasby Prize for his writing. He's also the poetry editor of The Twin Bill. He has 2 published books, Brief Tendencies, that just came out in August, I believe.
August, yeah.
Yep. And Limniskit.
That's right, yeah, Lemniscate.
Okay. So, Chris, thanks for joining us. And for anyone who's just now dropping in, I'm going to share a quick synopsis of his novella, Brief Tendencies, and then we'll get started with the interview. So his most recent, or I should say novella, Victor Bagley has suffered a memory lapse. In a mnemonic struggle to remember his story, Victor rambles through Paris and his consciousness until he meets a fateful ending. On his way, he meets India, who begins to show him another way of being. Brief Tendencies looks closely at the modern world through a series of dualities: danger and commodification, obsession and alienation, terror and safety. So with that, Chris, are you ready to dive in?
Let's dive in.
Good. Okay, so, all right, I'd like to start with, our viewers don't know this yet, but we'll get into it. But you have a shared lived experience with the protagonist, Victor Bagley, and that you are also an artist, writer, poet, living, working in Paris. And in fact, you're actually quite the globetrotter. You're now currently in New York,
Yeah.
but you've also lived in worked in London, LA. And so I'm just curious to know these very rich historic and literary cities, how do they influence or inspire your work? And beyond that, how does it, how do living in those cities inform your writing in that moment? So, do you feel you write differently in New York than you do in Paris versus LA? Or could you be just as creative or inspired if you were doing it from Clitheroe, England, or Garnett, Kansas?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. Yeah. I think your environment definitely has a big impact on whatever you're doing, you know, whether it's writing or, uh, you know, trying to fly a kite or, uh, you know, uh, put together a sailboat or something like that. Whatever you're doing, your environment has a big impact on you. So for me, I always felt like I wrote a lot better um, and more kind of soulfully in Paris. When I was in LA, I found um, writing was more difficult for
Okay.
some reason. Um, and but when I was in Paris, it was very kind of just inspired by uh, yeah, the city and those sort of intense cities that are sort of clustered together, and you know, people are trying to sort of hustle and make something of their lives, make something of themselves. I've always found that very inspiring, and so Brief Tendencies was really like it was mainly written in Paris, and I sort of finished it off in LA. But I feel like this sort of, I suppose, like the spirit of the book, like the soul of the book really started in Paris, and of course belongs in Paris as well. Um, Now that I'm in New York, I'm kind of back in this environment of. Uh, it almost reminds me of like a combination of between Europe and America. It's like the best of both worlds, really. So now I'm kind of inspired again, and sort of interested in the city and what the city can kind of do to people, uh, and um, and that kind of thing. But yeah, I definitely think your environment has a huge impact on whatever you're doing. I'm not one of these believers that you can write anywhere. You know, I think even if you say that, it's like, okay, well, try writing in a prison cell. Yeah. You'll have a difficult time. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think your environment is key. I think if you really want to make something, you have to put yourself in a place where you're going to be inspired. I don't think inspiration is like this old-fashioned Greek mystical thing. I think it's very real. It's, you know, scientific, and um, it's key to the process. Yeah.
In LA, you were it's scientifically a less creative place, at least for you. So you didn't live that Charles Bukowski life.
No, I'm not sure why that was. I think it might be because it was so different to Paris, and like I don't feel there's parts that I love about Los Angeles, but I don't feel it's really a literary place. It's really about the TV and movie industry. So I felt like, for me, when I tried to write in Los Angeles, the writing kind of lost that kind of literary edge that I felt was there with a bit of kind of bite and menace in Paris, and is kind of back in New York. But
You're back.
um, yeah, it's just it's a different place.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write Brief Tendencies? I mean, what kind of, where were you? Where did the story come from? Were you reading certain authors that kind of um, sparked the story?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I read a novel called Hopscotch by a South American author called Julio Cortázar, and I just really liked the sort of bohemian, kind of smoky, uh, sort of old world vibe to the book, and I wanted to kind of recreate that and see if I could do it um, in sort of more modern day Paris. And I also read a Paul Auster, you know, the New York trilogy.
Yes, I do.
It's a great text, and I really liked the this idea of like putting an outsider in Paris, and just kind of seeing what they get up to.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really the way that I write. Is I don't plan. I sort of really try and imagine the character first, and then it's like they're showing me what they're gonna do. You
Hmm.
know.
I like that.
Um,
Does the idea of the outsider often recur in your work?
yeah, I think so. Because I think they're the most interesting people, because I think that the outsider is really all of us. Um, I think this idea that there's some kind of exclusive club or some kind of exclusive room that we're not sort of invited to. I think I think it might be a load of rubbish. And that actually everyone feels
Mhm.
like on the outside in some way,
Even when you're on the inside.
even when you're on the inside. Yeah. Um, so I'm interested in the outsider because I think um, it's almost like how we all feel, but um, perhaps and perhaps that's why we're interested in kind of looking at these characters, because um, they're sort of more obvious representations of that, and then it's like, oh yeah, I kind of feel like that as well. Yeah, yeah.
Can you relate to Victor?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
I could definitely, I personally related to that character. You mentioned you inspired by this old sort of, smoky a European feel, right? And but in a modern Paris. And that's actually what struck me early on in the book, that if it weren't for references about I guess maybe advanced capitalism, right? Like what we're living in now, or even references. I think there's like references to the internet or cell phones or something. If it weren't
yeah,
for that, your book could easily take place in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I think. And I really liked that about it. It was really timeless in a lot of ways.
yeah. I'm really glad to hear that, because I think that because Paris is so kind of stuck in its ways, it hasn't really lost a lot of its traditions. So when you're living there, it really feels like that. It's like, you know, you go to a cafe or a bar. Those cafes and bars are all, hundreds of years old. So it's like you still have that. And the French, they smoke and they drink and blah blah blah. So it still has that kind of old world feel to it. And then you come outside and there's like a McDonald's. So I wanted to see if I could, yeah, sort of recreate that sense of sort of surprise and displacement
Mm,
in the city when you're there, because it feels very together. And then you have this like postmodern sort of capitalism
mm,
that has kind of infiltrated the city. And they feel like very, very different worlds that are sort of kind of conflicting in some kind of interesting way. So I definitely wanted to bring just some of that energy into the book that I think is going on now, which is that like we're all these great big cities, they're all tied to sort of these very particular kind of cultural traditions a lot of the time. But then there is this new kind of modern day, like kind of postmodern symbolism and the digital age going on. So it can create quite a sort of fractured environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to sort of see if I could bring that into the novel, the novella a little bit. And it's the same with, not to give away the ending, but it's the same with, just bringing in those surprising elements. It's like, you feel like you're in something very specific and secure, and then something happens that changes it, because I think that's very real to life. I don't think we're all standing on, solid ground.
Right.
Things can change at any.
Well, especially this last year, right? We've
Yeah.
I think another to speak to that, another thing I found interesting was and I'm speaking from an American point of view, right? Where I think oftentimes we can look at Europe, right, or older societies, cultures, and think very romantically about them, right? Because in
Yeah.
your book here, because this is
Sorry, I missed you. What did you say?
I'm going to quote because this romantic, idea that we have of European cities is actually exemplified. I have a quote here from your book that I'm going to read. Food, drink, scenery, it can make you wonder about things. Paris, of course, lacked none of these pleasures, which made it the perfect land in which to dream and send the imagination booming across the stars, which is beautiful and poetic, which I think, right, Americans maybe think
Thank
of
you.
old, European cities, and then to be ripped out of that when you talk about them being glued to their the family, like taking pictures or whatever in the park, the kids being like glued to the screen, whatever, texting, and we have that here, right? Which I associate with very new, right, newness, new society, modern, whatever, go, 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 technology, the digital age, like you said, and to
Yeah.
have things existing, coexisting, is interesting, and you relate more maybe than you thought you could to somebody living in Paris. And is that good? Is it bad? I don't know, but it's um, I liked the duality that is throughout the book is really striking. It's poetic and crude. It's beautiful and ugly, and there's hope and despair all together. And I just think that you weave that together beautifully.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that means a lot. That's definitely something that I think was more, yeah, kind of. I think I was like consciously trying to achieve, because I think life is very polarizing.
Mm.
Um, and 1 minute your life is great, 1 minute your life's terrible, then it's great again, then it's terrible. Um, and I think that that polarization is happening like in so many areas now in society, and just in this like strange era that we're living in. Even like the COVID thing, it's like, some people are like, oh, I've got to get my vaccination, I've got to get my mask, and other people are like, I'm not doing that.
Right. In the same world, maybe not the same reality, but yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's just my experience. Is life is very intense. Like I think people's lives are very intense, and even an outsider's life is intense and polarizing, and you know one can feel things very deeply, um, and on kind of many different scales. But then on top of that, like outside of the emotional realm, you've got this other like polarization, which is like these different sort of like cultural movements that in some ways like in opposition to each other, living in the same place. Like not just in Paris with what we've already talked about, but even in places like San Francisco. In San Francisco in the 60s was like this hub of, you know, like beat poetry and, you know, progressive movements, counterculture, all of this like weird hippie stuff. And now it's become the opposite. It's like a hub for like kind of the tech geek, really. Like I couldn't think of more like opposing worlds in one place. And I think that is what makes the modern era interesting, is that there is this kind of duality going on. So I was definitely trying to bring that into the book, because I think that's really what we're all living through in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but
And I have to say, because you mentioned it, when I was reading your book, I definitely got a very beat movement vibe from the book. And maybe I'm looking for it, because it's a area that have a lot of interest in. But I definitely I felt it. Same thing with the, you know, sort of very surrealist, like dark humor, Andre Breton type of feel.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you got that.
Real quick, okay, here's a quick fire. I'm gonna say a name and you say yes or no. Are you influenced by? Okay, Kerouac.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Andre Breton.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Rimbaud.
Yes, big yes.
Okay, this is
He's
all
the main. He's the main man. Yeah.
yeah. It's like a wine. I'm like, this is what I'm picking up on. So, but I like that, because it is the passion and that you know, the poet who feels so much, right? Who's in pain constantly,
Yeah.
in search of beauty and pureness all the time, but never able quite to achieve it, right? It's classic and very relatable, I think.
Yeah. I'm really glad that comes across, because that's another thing that I think like we all feel is like, and really what makes us human is this sense of like yearning.
Mhm.
Like we're all constantly yearning for something. What I've noticed is like, if ever I'm having a conversation with someone, quite often they'll say, if I just had this, or if I just had, you know, X, Y, and Z, I'll be good. You know,
Right.
it's like, I haven't met that many people that are like, I don't want anything. I'm not yearning for anything. You know.
It's the wanting.
Yeah. I think um, that's what makes us human. And I was really trying to make this as human as possible, and just to put kind of soul in the whole,
Yeah.
um, if I could. And yeah, I'm glad that comes across, because yeah, I think that's the way people feel. I think that's key to our lives. Yeah.
Well, can I ask you a few questions? Because I'm apart from the book, which I'm going to put it on screen, which I highly recommend. I also am very interested in you as a new, you know, writer. Well, new as in, I know you've been doing it for a long time, but early on, I guess, in your published career, and so I find that very fascinating. Um,
Yeah.
you and if you don't have answers to some of these questions, feel free to say pass, or I don't know, I haven't thought about it. But I have a couple questions to ask you about that. Um, do you have an ideal reader or audience? You mentioned a moment ago that you start writing, you start with the character first, and the character tells you. But
Mm.
ever at any point in the process, or maybe even it's once you're finished, do you have an idea of who your reader is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've heard some people say that they're always like thinking about the audience when they're writing, and even like an ideal reader. I don't really have that when I'm writing. I'm more thinking about how to like get the thing up in the air, how to make it as entertaining as possible, or not even entertaining, but as meaningful as possible. And I'll sort of rewrite, you know, a paragraph over and over again to try and do that. But as far as I go, it's like I'll think about like friends that I know who are kind of interested in literature and, you know, our kind of art, and I might have them kind of at the back of my mind and think, okay, well, you know, this friend might be kind of interested in this, or like, yeah, this line is gonna, you know, is going to work with this person. But I don't really think about the audience. I actually think if one does think about the audience too much, I mean, maybe not for everyone, but it might sort of take away, like, I don't know, it might sort of take away something. I think you should focus on the work, you know, first, and then sort of like the marketing, if that makes sense. Like, what audience is this right for? Otherwise, I think you might be trying to do sort of two jobs at once.
Right.
And, you know, I can only do one thing at once. So.
True. But do you ever, I guess maybe a better question then is, what do you want, or if anything, do you have an idea of what you want the reader to take away when they're reading some of your work, whether it's your novella, you write poetry, or is it purely self-expression or art for art's sake, or are you hoping that somebody walks away with something?
Yeah, of course. I want people to relate to the material. What I hope they take away from it is, yeah, just that that sense of sort of relating to something, and also feeling, you know, intimate with something. I think that's why literature will last. There's this great debate about, is the novel going to last and all of that stuff, because TV and movies are so popular and so kind of easy to consume. But I think the book will last because it's more intimate than the TV or, you know, the film. And I think especially now when people are sort of locked away and society sort of feels like it's almost like crumbling, and we're sort of you know, isolated really because of lockdown and stuff like that. I think people are craving that intimacy, and well, that might be why book sales have gone up as well.
Yeah.
But I think also that people will always crave that, and so if there was an answer to that question, I would say I just hope that people, when they're reading my work, they feel a sense of relation and intimacy, which is what I feel when I read my favorite books. I feel that kind of, oh, I get this, you know, I get what you're going on about, and I feel that sense of intimacy, and loneliness is kind of alleviated, you know. I think that's why we read, actually. Well, a reason why.
Yeah.
But
Have you ever, what's the most valuable piece of advice you received about writing, or your process, or the art form?
yeah, that's a good question. I think the best piece of advice that I've heard is like, read. I think you really need to like gather your material. For some people, and when I say read, I don't mean necessarily sitting down with a book, but actually going outside and reading what you're seeing, you know, and sort of taking it in. But also just reading like authors that are inspiring. Like when I first read Cortazar, and even the Beats to some extent, yeah, I thought, oh, you can do this with the word, you can do this with literature, and it was like a whole new kind of possibility had sort of opened up, and I think that um, yeah, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't read. So the best piece of advice I've heard is just like read and read and read. And then I think it's like, I can't remember that guy that we used to read at Goldsmiths, but was it Roland Barthes? Like, there's nothing outside the text or whatever.
Yeah, that I think it is actually. Yeah.
Yeah, like that idea of just, um, like everything is sort of influenced by something else.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's fine to like bring in all of these different influences and sort of put it through like the machine work of your brain as an artist, and then have it become something completely new.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know if you found that with your writing, but
I actually
with your
received.
script writing.
Well, nobody knows about that, but I recently did a piece of writing that I submitted to a journal, a lit mag. This is the first time I've ever done anything like that, and I had a friend who is also a writer read it for me because I was nervous. Oh, I don't know if this is any good. This is not the kind of writing I do, and
Yeah,
she said it will probably be good because you're a reader, because you read. Uh,
yeah,
that surprised me because you think of yourself, oh, I'm a reader. Not all readers are writers, but all writers are readers. And so that kind of made me, I guess, less anxious about submitting work somewhere. But
yeah,
to
yeah.
that, so to that end, I have to ask you, what are you reading right now? What's on your nightstand?
At the moment, I'm reading like a bunch of vampire novels because I'm trying to write something like vampiric and slightly more commercial. Um, so um, I'm reading Dracula kind of on repeat as an audiobook.
Oh, okay.
So I'm reading it and then I'm also listening to it as I'm kind of walking through Central Park and stuff like that.
I think
And
an old version narrated by Basil Rathbone. You can
oh,
get it
really?
bored.
I'm gonna have to have a look out for it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
actually,
Sorry. Say that again.
I know. I just said Dracula is very scary. It's legitimately, it holds up today. It is a scary book.
It's really scary. Yeah, the whole atmosphere is like mysterious and like creepy, and I feel like it suits New York now. I was having a conversation with a friend in New York the other day, and they were like, because it's like quieter than usual. It's like, and there's just like this slightly more kind of odd kind of sense and atmosphere to the whole city. It feels a bit more like darker and kind of even like vampiric. So listening to Dracula and kind of walking around the city, just with that atmosphere sort of kind of welling up in the background is is um, it feels very, yeah, kind of closely linked to what's going on. So I'm trying to do that. It's like I like read a bunch of vampire novels, starting with Dracula, and write something like very very realistic, a bit like in the same way that Dracula is. You know, it's like these letters. It's an epistolary
Yeah.
novel, um, and just making it like really realistic. But then like all of a sudden these kind of vampires appear. That's what's going on the table at the moment.
Well, I have a brilliant idea, Chris. You could start New York's first and foremost, the premier vampire book club. Think about it.
That is a great idea. Yeah, I'm going to start my Squarespace tonight.
And then you could tour and you could go to like New Orleans, right?
Ooh, New Orleans. Yeah, I haven't been, but sorry, say that again.
Yeah,
I didn't hear.
go to New Orleans and then Santa Cruz, California. That's where the vampires live.
Yes. Santa Cruz. Yeah, I've got to go there. Great idea.
All right. Okay, Chris, I'm going to wrap up our interview. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm so glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, thank you so much for putting this on. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Great stuff.
For everyone who tuned in, I don't know if you noticed, but we got a little comment here from Art of the Gypsy. Loves the book cover. What? I agree. Um, so yes, thanks everybody for tuning in. And next week on October 21st, there's a lunchtime author chat from 11 to 12 Eastern time. And we'll be interviewing Emily Itami, author of Fault Lines, a novel. So, all right. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks so much. Yeah, appreciate it. Bye.